My mom sneered, "Your brother's success makes you look small." So I stayed small until I bought the company that laid him off. Suddenly, height's relative. I'm Alex, 32 years old, male. And even now, just typing this out, my hands are shaking. I don't usually write online, but tonight I can't sleep. My brain keeps replaying one moment like a broken record. My mom leaning across the dinner table, wine glass in hand, lips curling into that practice sneer and saying, "Your brother's success makes you look small." I laughed it off at the time, fake, brittle, the way you laugh when you're trying not to cry in front of people who would love nothing more than to watch you fall apart. But something in me cracked that night. It wasn't the first jab, not by a long shot. It was just the sharpest one. The one that landed so deep I felt it days later. Let me back up. My brother, Mark, 34 years old, male, has always been the golden child, the prodigy, the one teachers praised, neighbors gossiped about, distant relatives brought up at reunions like they were reading off his LinkedIn. He got the scholarships, the fast-track promotions, the glossy engagement photos on Instagram. He made everything look easy. And honestly, when we were kids, I adored him for it. He was my big brother, taller, stronger, cooler. I followed him around like a puppy. But my mom, Diane, 59 years old, female, had this way of twisting admiration into competition. When Mark brought home straight A's, she'd hold his report card next to mine like a scoreboard. When I scored my first goal in soccer, she clapped politely, then said, "Mark had two by your age." Every milestone I reached became smaller in the shadow she insisted I measure myself against. And the worst part? Mark soaked it in. He played into it. He'd ruffle my hair after she praised him and smirk, "Don't worry, little bro. Not everyone's built to be tall." That line, tall, it stuck. It wasn't about height. It was about being someone who mattered. In our family, Mark stood tall. I stayed small. I remember once, years ago, I got promoted at work to a team lead. First time in my life I felt like I was actually getting somewhere. I told my parents over dinner, nervous but proud, and my mom literally said, "Well, it's no law degree, but at least you're trying." Mark clinked glasses with her and added, "Baby steps." My chest burned so hot I had to excuse myself and sit in the bathroom until my eyes weren't red anymore. That was the rhythm of my life. Every victory minimized, every shortcoming magnified, every comparison rigged, and I played my role. I kept my head down. I stayed small. I told myself if I worked quietly, maybe someday I'd grow into something that didn't need her approval. But here's the twist. Staying small taught me to notice things, to listen, to strategize instead of brag. And while Mark strutted around, chest out, telling everyone about his climb to the top, I was learning how ladders are built and who really owns them. And that's why the day came when I walked into the conference room of the company that had just laid him off, as the new owner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This isn't a revenge story without all the ugly pieces that made it possible. And God, there are so many. All right, deep breath. Here's where the story really starts to cut into bone. After that dinner, I couldn't stop replaying it. My mom's smirk, Mark's easy chuckle, the way my dad, Richard, 61 years old, male, just stared at his plate like maybe if he didn't look up, he wouldn't have to take sides. He never did. That's his specialty. Nodding, avoiding conflict, pretending neutrality makes him blameless. I left early that night, didn't even say goodbye. I sat in my car in their driveway, staring at the porch light, feeling like I'd been gutted. I wasn't a kid anymore. I had a job, an apartment, a life, but in that house I was still the runt of the litter. The small one. Mark wasn't just successful, he performed success. He drove the shiny car, posted about corporate retreats, showed up to family events with monologues about quarterly projections. He worked at a big manufacturing firm in the city, the kind of place with glossy lobby floors and a coffee machine worth more than my rent. He loved to casually drop in, "When you're operating at my level," like the whole room should pause to applaud. I think that's what killed me. He believed his own hype. He didn't just let mom crown him golden. He wore it like armor. And any time I tried to bring up my own wins, he'd one-up them. If I said I'd landed a new client, he'd say, "Cute. I just signed a contract worth 5 times that." If I said I was saving for a condo, he'd say, "Real estate's overrated. You should invest in stocks like me." Always taller, always louder. It all blurred together until one memory snapped into focus. Years ago, when I was maybe 23, I showed up to a family barbecue with a girl I'd been seeing. Leah, my first real girlfriend. I was nervous introducing her, but proud. Halfway through the night, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She lowered her voice like she was whispering some brutal truth for my own good. "You're punching above your weight, Alex. Don't get too comfortable." Leah dumped me 3 months later. I never told anyone what Mom had said, but I swear it poisoned me. Made me think she was right. So yeah, staying small wasn't just about career. It bled into everything. Relationships, confidence, even how I carried myself. I kept my head down at family events, laughed at the right times, made myself smaller just so I wouldn't take up space I'd be mocked for. But the world outside my family wasn't as cruel. I'd been working in logistics, unglamorous but steady. I learned everything from supply chains to warehouse management, always absorbing, always watching the guys above me make mistakes. I didn't brag about it, but I built skills, real ones. And over the years, I scraped together savings, invested carefully, partnered with a quiet investor who hated the spotlight as much as I did. Meanwhile, Mark was burning bright, too bright. He made big bets at work, played politics, climbed fast, and when you climb that fast, sometimes the ladder cracks. The first crack I noticed wasn't at his company, it was at a family birthday party for my niece. Mark showed up late, phone glued to his ear, pacing the backyard. He didn't eat, didn't sit, just barked into the phone. At one point he snapped, "I can't cover for this forever. If the numbers don't stabilize, we're screwed." His face was pale, sweating. He caught me watching and slammed the sliding door shut like I'd walked in on something private. That was the moment I realized. For the first time, Mark looked small. And that's when the idea lodged itself in my brain. What if I didn't stay small? What if I took everything I'd built quietly, carefully, and aimed it right at the pedestal my mom put him on? I didn't know yet how, but I knew this. If the ladder beneath him cracked any further, I'd be ready. Don't forget to subscribe. The collapse started slow, like a hairline fracture you don't notice until the whole wall caves in. A few months after that backyard scene, Mark called me out of the blue. Not unusual, but his tone was. Normally, his voice carried that smug, easy confidence, like every word deserved applause. This time, tight, clipped, almost panicked. "Alex, you still working in logistics?" he asked. I told him, yeah, I was. Running operations for a smaller firm, keeping supply chains tight, minimizing costs, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. He laughed, brittle. "Guess that's your lane. Safe, say." But then his voice dropped, almost swallowed. "Things at my company are complicated. You probably wouldn't understand." Translation: he needed to say it out loud but couldn't admit weakness to me. Still had to keep me small, even while drowning. That night I dug around. Old habit, I'd always been the observer. A couple of contacts in my network told me whispers. The manufacturing giant Mark worked for was bleeding money. Overextended on overseas expansion, inventory bottlenecks, contracts not being met. On paper, they still looked solid, but behind closed doors, the foundation was cracking. And then came the moment burned into my memory. It was a Sunday afternoon, gray and wet, the kind of day where everything feels heavier. I stopped by my parents' house because Dad had asked me to help fix their Wi-Fi, his one excuse to spend time with me without Mom turning it into a competition. I walked in through the side door and froze. Mark was in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. Mom sat on the couch, glass of wine balanced perfectly in hand. He was ranting, voice cracking, hands flying. "They're scapegoating me, Mom. I told them the numbers were unsustainable. I told them supply couldn't keep up, but they want someone to blame and it's me. Mom didn't even flinch. She sipped her wine, calm as a statue. Then she said, "You'll land on your feet. You always do. That's what makes you tall." That word again. Tall. My chest clenched. I stepped forward then, into the room. Mark spun around, eyes wild, and for the first time in my life he looked smaller than me. Not in height, God knows he'd always lorded that over me, but in posture. His shoulders were hunched. His voice trembled. "You don't get it, Alex," he snapped when he saw me. "You've never had this much responsibility. You can stay in your little lane forever and no one cares, but me, I can't afford to fall." I wanted to comfort him. Some small part of me, the kid who used to idolize his big brother, wanted to reach out and say it would be okay. But then I looked at Mom, at her faint smirk, at the way she tilted her head just slightly toward me like, see, even broken, he's taller than you. That killed the sympathy in me. I left without a word. That night, I called my investor, told him we needed to move faster on the acquisition we'd been eyeing, a struggling manufacturing company with all the infrastructure but none of the leadership to make it profitable. The one Mark's firm had just swallowed whole, choking on debt in the process. It was the perfect storm. Within 3 months, Mark was laid off, unceremoniously, publicly, the kind of restructuring that leaves blood on the floor. And me? I walked into the boardroom, signed the papers, and bought the very company that had gutted him. But I didn't celebrate, not yet. Because the real storm wasn't Mark losing his job. The real storm was what happened when my mom found out I was the one pulling the strings. I didn't tell my parents right away. I wanted to savor it, not the money, not the deal, but the irony. For once, the son who stayed small was sitting higher than they could imagine. But secrets have a way of leaking. It was 2 weeks after the acquisition when Diane called. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Did you know your brother was laid off? Her voice was tight, clipped, already looking for someone to blame. I said, yeah, I heard. You heard? She repeated it like it was a crime. Do you have any idea what this does to his reputation, to our family's reputation? That word, our families, hit me like a slap. Mark's career was the family. Mine had never counted. I could have lied, could have kept my head down the way I always had. But something in me snapped. I don't just know, Mom. I own the company that laid him off. Silence. Then the sound of her wine glass clinking against something. Maybe the coffee table, maybe the floor. I pictured her frozen in place, mouth open, trying to decide whether to scream or laugh. When she finally spoke, her voice dripped venom. You? You couldn't possibly, but I cut her off. I could. I did. While you were busy measuring me against Mark, I was building something you never saw coming. She hung up. I didn't hear from her again for 3 days. Not a word from Dad either. But Mark? Oh, he reached out, showed up at my apartment unannounced, pounding on the door like he was trying to break it down. When I opened it, he shoved past me. His face was red, his eyes wild. You set me up, he shouted, knocking a stack of mail off my counter. You've been waiting to humiliate me. I tried to stay calm. I didn't set you up, Mark. Your company collapsed because of bad decisions. I just bought the pieces. That only made him angrier. He swept his arm across my counter, sending a coffee mug and my phone crashing to the floor. You couldn't stand it, could you? Being small. You had to come for me. I'll admit, for a split second I was scared. He was bigger, stronger, and he wasn't thinking straight. His fist clenched, his chest heaved like he was ready to swing. But then something shifted. He saw the look on my face, not fear, not anymore, but something closer to pity. And it broke him more than a punch would have. He collapsed onto my couch, head in his hands, muttering, I was supposed to be the one. I was supposed to be tall. For the first time in our lives, Mark looked like the little brother. That should have been enough, but Diane wasn't going to let it rest. She doesn't lose gracefully. She doesn't lose at all. The following weekend, I got invited, summoned, to a family dinner. I knew what it was, a trial. Mom presiding, Dad nodding along, Mark licking his wounds. I almost didn't go, but something in me wanted to see it, wanted to hear the words come out of her mouth. And I wasn't wrong. We hadn't even made it past appetizers when Diane leaned across the table, eyes cold, and said, You think humiliating your brother makes you tall? You've only proven how small you really are. That was the moment, the one where I stopped being quiet, where all the years of swallowing my words finally boiled over. I opened my mouth to answer her, but what I said, what I did, would turn dinner into a war zone. Don't forget to subscribe. Update. Wow. I didn't expect so many people to care about my messed up family drama, but here we are. I read every single comment last night. Some of y'all had me laughing. Some of you had me questioning my sanity. And some of you hit nerves I didn't even know were raw. Quick recap for anyone new. I'm Alex, 32, male. My mom Diane has spent my whole life comparing me to my brother Mark, 34, male, making me feel small. Mark was the golden child until his company laid him off. Except the twist? I quietly built myself up in logistics and ended up buying the very company that cut him loose. When my mom found out, she basically declared war. Now, let me tell you about that dinner. I went in thinking maybe, just maybe, there'd be some acknowledgement. Not congratulations, not a parade, but at least recognition that I wasn't the family screw-up they painted me as. Instead, Diane came out swinging. First glass of wine down, she sneered, "Humiliating your brother doesn't make you tall, Alex. It makes you pathetic." And I lost it. Years of biting my tongue, years of letting her pit me against Mark, it all boiled over. I told her everything. How her comparisons poisoned me, how her sneers ate away at my confidence, how every time she chose Mark's victories over mine, she taught me to shrink. And then I told her the truth she couldn't stand. I'm not small anymore. You just can't stand that you didn't see it coming. The room exploded. Mark slammed his fist on the table so hard a plate cracked. Dad tried to shush me, saying, "Don't upset your mother," like I was 12 again. And Diane? She stood up, knocked over her chair, and screamed, "You'll never be him!" So loud the neighbors probably heard. I walked out, didn't even grab dessert. My phone's been blowing up ever since. Angry texts from Mom, guilt trips from Dad, half-deranged voice messages from Mark about how I ruined his life. And here's the thing. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought this was the moment I finally stood tall. But instead, I feel scorched, like I dropped a bomb in the middle of my family and I don't know what's left standing. Some of you said I should cut them off completely. Some of you said to rub it in harder. And one comment that really stuck with me was, "Revenge is sweet, but what's sweeter is watching people choke on their own entitlement." That one hit me. Because I think the real revenge hasn't even started yet. And trust me, Diane is about to choke. After that dinner, the floodgates opened. Diane started calling me daily, sometimes multiple times a day, alternating between icy calm and full-blown screaming fits. One morning she hissed, "You've embarrassed this family. You don't deserve what you have." That same evening, she left me a voicemail crying so hard she could barely breathe, begging me to stop torturing your brother. Mark wasn't much better. He showed up outside my apartment twice in 1 week. First time, he sat in his car, engine idling, lights on, just staring up at my window like some unhinged ex. Second time, he stormed up the steps and banged on my door until a neighbor threatened to call the cops. When I opened the blinds, he shouted, "You think you're better than me now? You're nothing without me." His face was red, spit flying as he ranted, fist clenching like he wanted to break through the glass. But here's the thing. I didn't just want to defend myself. I wanted them to feel it, to taste the humiliation they'd force-fed me for years. And I knew exactly how. Mark had been scheduled to speak at a Young Leaders of Industry panel downtown, booked months before his layoff. He was supposed to represent his company as a rising star. When the company cut him, he lost the slot. But the organizers didn't know that I'd bought the very firm he was supposed to represent. So I made a call. I told the organizers I'd be happy to step in. The day of the event, I walked into the hotel ballroom in a sharp navy suit, calm as stone. The place was filled with entrepreneurs, executives, press. As I took my seat on stage, I scanned the crowd. And there they were, front row, like vultures, Diane and Mark. My mom sat ramrod straight, her face frozen in a polite mask, but her eyes burned holes through me. Mark looked wrecked, pale, tie crooked, fists balled in his lap. When the moderator introduced me as the new owner of Crestline Manufacturing, a ripple went through the room. I caught Mom's lips tighten. Mark's jaw clenched so hard I thought he'd crack a tooth. And then came the real revenge. During the Q&A, someone asked how I'd managed to buy a company at my age. I smiled, leaned into the mic and said, "By staying underestimated. People tend to overlook you when they think you're small. But staying small teaches you where the real cracks are. And once you see them, you can grow taller than anyone expected." Gasps, applause. And in the front row, Mark snapped. He stood up, shouting, "That's my line! That was supposed to be me!" The entire room turned. Phones came out. Diane grabbed at his sleeve, hissing, "Sit down!" But he shoved her hand off so hard her wine glass tipped over, shattering on the carpet. Security moved in as Mark tried to charge the stage, yelling incoherently about how I stole everything from him. It was chaos. Flashing cameras, broken glass, Diane shrieking his name, Mark being dragged out by two guards as he kicked and cursed. And me? I just sat there, microphone still in hand, letting the silence stretch before I said softly, "Height, it seems, is relative." The audience erupted. Some clapped, some whispered, some just stared at me like I'd orchestrated theater. And in a way, I had. That was the first time in my life I didn't feel small. But here's the part I didn't expect. Diane wasn't going to let Mark's meltdown be the last word. If I thought she was vengeful before, I hadn't seen anything yet. After the panel, I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. Mark had humiliated himself in front of half the city's business community. Diane had been forced to watch her golden child unravel, and I delivered my mic drop line with an audience to witness it. But I should have known better. Diane doesn't retreat, she reloads. It started with whispers. A week later, I got texts from colleagues. "Hey, weird question, but are you really qualified to own Crestline?" Or, "Someone's been saying you bought the company with shady investors." At first, I brushed it off. But then I started hearing the same rumors in different circles, too consistent to be coincidence. Turns out, Diane had gone nuclear. She was calling former coworkers, neighbors, even people at my dad Richard's office, spinning stories about how I'd only gotten where I was by tricking people. She claimed my investor was a front for some criminal operation. She even hinted, God help me, that I'd blackmailed Crestline's board. But that wasn't the worst part. One night around midnight, I was jolted awake by pounding on my apartment door. Not Mark this time, two cops. Someone had filed a noise complaint saying I was throwing illegal parties. Total bullshit, obviously. The cops looked embarrassed once they saw I was standing there in sweatpants, apartment dark, alone. But it shook me. Who calls in fake complaints? Who weaponizes the cops against their own kid? I didn't have to guess. 2 days later, I got confirmation. My downstairs neighbor, sweet older guy named Henry, pulled me aside in the lobby, said a woman matching Diane's description had knocked on his door, asking if he ever felt unsafe living under Alex. She told him I was unstable and dangerous when provoked. Henry, bless him, shut the door in her face. But by then the message was clear. Diane wasn't just angry. She wanted to ruin me. Mark wasn't helping. After his public meltdown, he doubled down on the theatrics. He spammed my inbox with emails, some raging, some sobbing, all with the same theme. "You stole my life, give it back." One morning I came down to find the side of my car keyed, small, carved in jagged letters across the paint. That one broke something in me. I sat in the driver's seat staring at the word, fingers gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. All those years of Diane's sneers, Mark's smirks, Dad's silence, they were still trying to force me into the same box, small. But I wasn't small anymore. So I made a choice. If Diane wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. I had leverage they couldn't touch. Years of watching, listening, remembering, the kind of receipts that can blow up a reputation faster than any rumor. And I'd been holding on to one particular secret, tucked away like a loaded gun. Diane thought she could make me choke, but she'd forgotten. I'd spent my whole life learning how to breathe under her thumb. And now it was her turn to suffocate. Update 2. I didn't think things could get uglier after Mark's meltdown at the panel, but I underestimated my mom, Diane. Y'all warned me in the comments. She's not done, she's regrouping. Yeah, you were right. So here's where we're at. Diane has been calling around like some deranged PR manager, telling anyone who'll pick up the phone that I'm a fraud. My investors shady, my business deals dirty, I'm unstable. She even told my neighbor I was dangerous. Who does that to their own kid? Mark keyed my car. I know it was him. He carved the word small across the side like some middle school bully with a vendetta. Cost me $2,000 to fix, but honestly, seeing that word again, in jagged metal, almost broke me more than the money. Like they'll never let me out of that box. And yes, someone, gee, wonder who, filed a fake police complaint about me throwing illegal parties. 2 officers knocking at midnight while I'm in sweatpants alone, watching Netflix. They left laughing, but it rattled me. My mom literally weaponized the cops against me. I've been sitting with this sick, hollow feeling, like I've clawed my way out of the hole they dug for me and they're still grabbing at my ankles trying to drag me back down. But then I remembered something a lot of you said after my first post. Revenge isn't about the loudest hit. It's about the one they never see coming. And trust me, I've got something Diane will never see coming. See, growing up in that house, I learned to keep my head down, but I also learned to listen. And Diane, she loves her wine and her secrets. She's been careless. I've been careful. And let's just say I've been holding on to a piece of information that could turn her entire little social empire into ashes overnight. I wasn't planning to use it. Honestly, I thought just living well would be revenge enough. But after the rumors, the cops, the car, screw it. If she wants war, I'll end it. A lot of you asked for the sweet revenge part. Well, buckle up. Because the next move isn't just payback, it's checkmate. Here's the thing about Diane. She thrives on image. The tailored blouses, the curated Facebook posts about Mark's achievements, the holiday newsletters dripping with humble brags. To her, appearances are reality. So if you want to wound her, you don't hit her in private, you hit her where everyone can see. And I knew exactly where. For years, Diane has been the unofficial queen bee of her Ladies Association, a club of suburban moms who host charity luncheons, post staged photos of themselves handing oversized checks, and gossip about everyone else's kids while pretending they're raising saints. She lives for those events. They're her stage, her throne room. And she had one coming up. The Spring Charity Gala. Black tie, speeches, catered dinner, the whole parade. I knew because she bragged about it constantly, how she was chairing the committee, how she'd be giving the keynote speech, her moment to shine. So I made my move. Remember how I said Diane's careless with secrets? One night years ago, after too many glasses of Chardonnay, she let something slip. She'd been dipping into the association's funds. Nothing massive, but enough to cover her image. Designer clothes, spa days. The kind of lifestyle she couldn't afford on Dad Richard's salary. At the time, I just filed it away, too beaten down to know what to do with it. But I'd quietly kept receipts, bank transfers, screenshots, even a half-drunk voicemail where she whined to a friend about borrowing from the charity account. So while Diane rehearsed her speech, I drafted my own, and I sent copies of my evidence packet anonymously to the other board members, time to arrive the morning of the gala. The night of the event, I didn't even plan to go inside. I just parked nearby and waited. Right on schedule, chaos erupted. My phone buzzed with messages, screenshots, photos, snippets of gossip flying like wildfire. The board had confronted her. She denied it. They played the voicemail. She screamed it was fake. They pulled out the bank statements. She knocked over a table of hors d'oeuvres, shrieking at them like a banshee. Someone caught it on video. Within hours, it was on Facebook, then Twitter, then everywhere. Diane, the queen of appearances, red-faced, mascara-streaked, slurring, yelling, being dragged out of her own gala by two security guards while guests gawked. I sat in my car watching it unfold in real time on my phone, equal parts numb and elated. Years of sneers, of being told I was small, and now the world was watching her crumble. But here's the twist. She didn't just crumble privately. She detonated. The next morning, I woke up to voicemails. Dad begging me to fix this. Mark screaming that I'd destroyed their mother. Diane alternating between sobbing apologies and threats of disowning me forever. And for once, I didn't feel small. I felt tall. Tall enough to finally look my family in the eye without flinching. But the fallout wasn't over. Because when someone like Diane loses her throne, she doesn't just disappear quietly. She claws, she lashes, she tries to drag everyone else into the pit with her. And Mark, already broken, was about to become her weapon. The charity gala video spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, Diane's perfect image was in ashes. Local news picked it up. Community leader accused of misusing funds. The association ousted her immediately. Friends she'd gossiped with for decades stopped answering her calls. For a woman who lived on appearances, it was a death sentence. But instead of shrinking away, Diane doubled down. She went into full-blown scorched earth mode. She started showing up at Crestline's offices, screaming in the lobby that I was a fraud, demanding to see the board. Security had to drag her out twice. One afternoon, she marched in holding a framed photo of Mark shaking hands with his old CEO, shoving it at the receptionist like proof that he was the rightful heir to the company. Employees whispered about it for days. Then she turned Mark loose. Mark was already unraveling, but now Diane weaponized him. She stoked his rage, told him I'd stolen not just his job, but his birthright. He started tailing me after work, his car in my rear view like a shadow. He left notes on my windshield. Thief, imposter. I'll take back what's mine. The worst was the night he cornered me outside my apartment building. He looked feral, clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. You think you're tall now? He spat, chest heaving. You're standing on my shoulders. Without me, you'd still be nothing. And then, he shoved me, hard. I staggered back into the wall. For a second, I thought he was going to swing. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. But then he broke, just collapsed against the wall, sobbing into his hands. I was supposed to be the one, he choked. Not you. I didn't touch him, didn't comfort him. I just walked past up the stairs into my apartment and locked the door. That was the last time I saw him face to face. Richard tried to mediate once, calling me with his usual weak plea. She's your mother. He's your brother. Can't we just move on? But I realized he wasn't asking for peace. He was asking me to step back into my old role. Small, quiet, apologetic. And I couldn't. Not anymore. So I made my final move. I blocked Diane's number. I blocked Mark's. I even blocked Dad's. I told Crestline's security team to flag them as trespassers. And then I walked into my office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and I let myself breathe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking to fit their narrative. I wasn't the runt, the disappointment, the small one. I was just me, tall enough. The last message I ever got from Diane before I cut her off was a voicemail. Her voice cracked, half snarling, half pleading. You may think you've won, Alex, but family always remembers who you really are. Maybe she's right. Maybe they'll always remember me as small. But the difference now? I don't.